grants for nonprofit resources, to provide management and operational support to other nonprofits, and in 2010 created the Nonprofit Development Corporation to provide nonprofits with affordable space and development opportunities, something we all could use, I'm sure. He's currently the executive director of both of the nonprofits, in addition to the Center for Community Resources. So, busy man, not a lot of time, but he's giving us some of it, so let's give him a warm welcome. And please make sure you turn off your phones.
Thank you all. About 10 years ago, I had something very dramatic and somewhat traumatic happen to me, and I became the executive director of a nonprofit. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years in operational development for a very large nonprofit, and moving to a very small nonprofit that was in distress. It was $600,000 in debt, and it was projecting about a $2 million budget. So it was really like the Titanic sinking the Allegheny River. And the week prior to my starting, they called me and said, "We cannot make payroll, and what can we do?" And I turned to my wife to tell her, and she's like, "Mike, what do you have us getting into?" Well, needless to say, we worked through those challenges, but what happened over the course of the next couple months is we started to try to work on this distressed organization. About 2 months into it, the board sat me down and said, "Mike, we want you to know that we are a management board. We are an operational board, and we want all the operations and management aspects of the organization to go through us." That was the executive committee, and so that was really foreign to me because working in my last job, I had a lot of engagement with the executive staff, a lot of engagement with the board, and we were really looking at planning and doing things and not necessarily looking at what I would call shoveling coal into the furnace. You could handle that.
Thank you.
And they were very much so heavily engaged in the operations of the organization that when I got there, the administrative assistant told me that the former executive director actually took naps in the afternoon because the board was handling most aspects of the organization. Now, this isn't to get critical on operational aspects of an organization. If you're small and you're starting out, I think they're very appropriate to look at all hands on deck, getting things moving. But if you're not starting to look at more of the longitudinal aspects of where you're going, then you're going to fall short in regards to your mission that you're called to be doing. That's the action really of your organization. So I'm fighting with the board members a little bit over the course of these several months, and actually even a little bit longer, in regards to whose role was what and what we were doing from an organization. So I decided to take a step back and really start to engage the board members individually and ask them what they thought their identity and purpose was in regards to the organization, what they thought my identity and purpose was in regards to the organization, and where did they think the organization should be going. And it was through those conversations that I found out that there was a lot of confusion in regards to that. You can only have so many people shoveling coal, so what happens is a lot of people stand around watching. And those that are necessarily shoved into the role of shoveling coal don't necessarily want to be there, because some of the board members said, "I didn't sign up to have a secondary job. I didn't sign up for this, or I feel like I'm attending, but I'm not participating in the board meetings because I'm removed from some of that day-to-day stuff that continues to go on there." And obviously, I was frustrated in my role, and so we really started to talk to them about more of a perspective. I picked this picture not just because it's train tracks, because you want to get the board out of the caboose, right? You want to get them out of the engine there, excuse me. But this is a perspective drawing, and I think from making it look this way, and this picture, your board needs to start to look at perspective down the tracks there, because if they're shoveling coal, they're not necessarily engaged with how fast that train is moving, what cargoes it's hauling, what cargo it's unloading. And from an organization perspective, you're looking at programs you should be taking on, paths that you should be going. Your board should be out there helping you lay the tracking, looking for the pitfalls, not shoveling the coal in there. Now, when I talk to the board members, why do they get involved sometimes with the operational aspects? It's very easy to get in there because, if we have a board member who has an accounting background, they're going to gravitate to the accounting practices of our nonprofit, right? because that's what they're familiar with in their own job. They're not familiar with strategic planning and those other aspects that we expect from board members. They're going to gravitate to what they know, where the action's at, and what they can see results in. Because when you're looking at numbers or policies, you institute them, you're going to see instant gratification. Where this stuff is more longitudinal, okay? This more of the strategic planning, the strategical boards is longitudinal. It's hard for them to kind of understand. And I always look at farmers, you know, they don't reap what they sow in the same season. And you have to plant those seeds with your board members to understand that, you know, what we're doing today is going to be harvested later. But why do we need to move out of an operational perspective? Well, if your board members are having incongruency in regards to their identity and purpose, right? And then that means your executive director is going to have incongruencies in their identity and purpose, which means your organization is going to have incongruencies in its identity and purpose. So how do we get there? We came up with 5 tenets that we thought were kind of pragmatic for everyone. The first one is motivation. Most board members are sought and brought on for time, treasure, and talent, not necessarily always engaged from a personal aspect. Why are they on the board? Well, some people might be on the board because they have a family member with mental illness, and so they're on a board that deals with mental illness. I saw that some organizations here with cancer, obviously they're having board members who are impassioned because they have a loved one who has been afflicted with that disease. Or if you have an affinity for history, you might be on a museum board. But if you're not engaging them on what their motivation is to be on the board, then how can you engage them in opportunities for them to be there on your board? And that's something that you just have to ask yourself and ask your board members. And you have to do it with each one of your board members. Another one is board size and diversity. What is the right size? Well, it depends. If you're a small organization starting out, a very small board would be great because you are going to get into that operational aspect. But as you start to look at growing and developing, you need to look at expanding your board. Some recommend as high as 15. I know PANO says no less than 5. But really, I'm just going to tell you, it depends. It's a conversation that you have. And throughout our companies, our board membership has varied depending on where we're at from an organizational perspective. So all I can tell you is that has to be a conversation that you engage with your board members. The second piece is diversity. We were working with a company that had 15 board members. 80% of the board members were over the age of 60. 85% were women. 85% were in the nonprofit and governmental work. And 3 were actually from the same organization. Now, that's not a very diverse board. And if you don't have diversity, you're not going to have diversity of thought. And there should be natural conflict that goes on in your board and disagreements. If you look at, back to our farming analogy, a plant has to struggle to get through the ground to blossom. If your board is not wrestling and struggling with things, then it's not going to bear good fruit. And so if you don't have that diversity in there, and looking at diversity in regards to not just types of people, but professions, people who have connections to different organizations or to foundations, then you're going to be really short-sighted in that longitudinal planning. Board role and responsibilities. We spend an awful long time vetting people to come into our organization. We do it all the time. We fret over, is this employee going to be a good employee? We check their references. We do all types of things. And then what we do, we provide them a job description. We provide them a framework in which they operate. But most board members come onto our organizations and we provide them little or no written materials in regards to their role and responsibility. But then we expect them to be successful. Now, Bridgebrand did a recent study, and you can see this, only 21% of nonprofits, and this is national, 21% had job descriptions for their board members. 56%, nothing. And so you look at it from an aspect there, you can't expect success. You cannot expect there to be a diversity of thought or a presence if you're not giving out responsibilities to your board members and what their obligations are. Sometimes our board orientations are a little fuzzy. I've sat through board orientations where it's I stand up, I tell you who I am, you stand up and give your names, and that's our orientation to each other, and that's about it. Really what you're going to look at is a board orientation where you're going to do these points here. Know the people. So list of board members, their terms, the basic information. Know the responsibilities about what's expected of a board member. They need to know the legal framework that they are representing in regards to that organization, and they need to know the organization. Now, I always say this isn't like Ronco, you know, you set it and forget it, it's just going to marinate on itself. You need to revisit this every single year and evaluate this with your board members. And the cool thing is that depending on how your terms are with your board members, you can use that opportunity when a new board member comes in to kind of revisit that. But here's the great thing. The things that we talked about earlier can get covered here first off. Because the first three things are really about old board members. These things here, you can inject those right into your board orientation. This was actually written on a chalkboard in our building, and plan your work and work your plan. And what do I mean by this? You need to have a strategic plan. And the strategic plan should be 1 to 3 years. And this actual strategic plan is our strategic plan as it currently exists. And I've incorporated this into my executive reports. Every report that I provide to the board has these, not the goals necessarily, but it has the topics here listed, and I'm telling the board what I'm doing in relationship to them, but guess what? That's theirs. And they have to tell me and report to the board at large what they're doing in regards to their responsibilities to the strategic plan. And by doing that, on our board meetings, we are moving that train down the track. Now I'm here to give you a little bit of encouragement. They said I had to be positive today, make sure it wasn't all down. This is a lot of work. And there's a lot of resources out there, but there's also a lot of good people, and there's good trade groups that want you to be successful in this arena. So don't think that this is impossible, that you can be successful in this. That nonprofit, you know, you're not supposed to self-promote. That nonprofit's debt's eradicated because we were able to change. And it's grown from a $2 million organization to a $14 million organization in 10 years because we were able to evolve. So what's the weight on your train? Nonprofit makes up about $200 billion here in this community, just in Pennsylvania. And Chris and I's rough estimate is it's about 2 million jobs at minimum. That's a conservative approach. So you got that train going down the track. That's the load that you're carrying. What I'm going to ask you is don't be asleep at your desk. Thank you.